Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I'm really glad that you chose to join me for today's lesson. Today we're resuming our series of talks on big names in the Bible. And today we're going to begin the first of several lessons on the person of Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet, and there's a book in the Bible that bears his name. And it's one of the longest books in the Bible. It has 66 chapters. Now, we don't know a whole lot about the prophet Isaiah in terms of his personal life. We know that he was born probably around 750, 740 BC. We also know that it's likely that he was born in Jerusalem. And you may recall from some of our previous lessons that when the kings came on the scene, eventually Israel divided into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom was called Judah, and the capital was in Jerusalem. Isaiah was called to be a prophet in the southern kingdom, in the nation of Judah, in and around Jerusalem. We also know from the book of Isaiah that Isaiah was married and they had at least 2 children. And we'll speak a little bit more about that in a later lesson. So the story of Isaiah's call is given to us in Isaiah chapter 6. And there Isaiah says that one day while he was in the temple, he had a vision of God. And in that vision, he was made aware of just how holy God is. And what we mean by the word holy is that God is very, very different from human beings. And Isaiah was overwhelmed with the glory and the majesty of God. He was very humbled. But also in that vision, God spoke and says, I need someone to go and speak to my people. Who will go for me? And Isaiah responded and said, Here I am, I will go, send me. And that's exactly what Isaiah did. He followed God, and God sent him to begin to speak to the people. Now, the message that Isaiah delivered is based on his name. His name means the Lord is salvation. And pretty much throughout all the messages that Isaiah delivered, that was one of the themes. The Lord and God alone. God alone is our salvation. Now, why was that message important? Well, according to Isaiah 6, Isaiah was called to become a prophet in the year that King Uzziah had died. Uzziah had been the king in the southern kingdom for quite some time, and the nation had become very, very prosperous, very, very wealthy and self-secure. This affected the people in a number of ways. For one, they had so much wealth and they had so much stuff that they began to wonder if God was all that important. And they also began to believe that, well, we're rich, we're prosperous, nobody can touch us. No other nation will ever be as strong as we are. And they even began to talk amongst themselves and saying, God will never let the city of Jerusalem be destroyed, and God will never, ever let the temple be destroyed. Well, Isaiah was called to be a prophet during that period of uncertainty after Uzziah died because there were other nations around Israel and Judah who were growing stronger, and they would pose a threat to the nation. And as well, Isaiah was called to speak to the people and say, look, you've got it all wrong. Just because Jerusalem is God's city and the temple is here. That doesn't mean that God won't ever let it be destroyed. Your faith must not be in your power and your wealth. Your faith must be in God. In other words, Isaiah preached his name. The Lord and the Lord alone is our salvation. Now, we'll have opportunity to talk more about those things as we work through these lessons. But here's the other point. When Isaiah was called, the Lord pretty much told him that he would be disappointed in the results of his ministry. In other words, he says, Isaiah, you're going to preach, you're going to speak, but not a whole lot of people are going to take to heart what you're saying. Not a whole lot of people are going to pay attention. In other words, I've called you to do a work, and success is not guaranteed. Wow. Now, most of the time, we think that when God calls us to do something and we decide to do it, then everything is going to go great. It's all going to work. Well, Isaiah was called to be faithful, and he was called to be faithful even though what he had to offer wouldn't be well received. And that's something we can think about for our own faith. If we're following God or if we're devoted to God, how hard is it for us to stick with God when things don't go our way or things don't go as we expect them to go? That's a question that Isaiah had to live with and explore for himself. And that's a question that we have to explore for ourselves. How far are we willing to go with God even when things don't work as we anticipate them working? Can we truly believe that the Lord and the Lord alone is our salvation? Well, that's something we'll explore in the lessons ahead. But for now, that's sort of an overview or a big picture look at Isaiah. As always, I'm really glad that you spent these few minutes with me. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call or send me a text or an email. I'd be happy to speak with you anytime. Thanks again for joining me today. And as always, I wish you well, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye, and God bless.